Welcome to the Call to Flourish podcast. My name is Thomas Cronquist. I'm your host with Father Charles Sikorsky, the president of Divine Mercy University. Father, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, Tom. Hope you're doing well too.
Very well, Father. Thank you. We have a very interesting program today. We are going to be talking with Dr. Kathie Erwin, who's a professor in our School of Counseling. And Kathie, thank you so much for being with us. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background and the topic that we will be discussing today?
Absolutely. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I've been for a lot of years here in Florida, in addition to a counselor educator. I'm also a certified gerontologist, which is a special interest of mine. I have several books on that subject that are used widely in social services programs because I had to learn by doing a whole lot of things. There wasn't much out there when I started doing this work. And it was just one of those things God called me to. I didn't plan on it. It was a happening. And I found out how much that I loved working with older adults and how little there was in the counseling field to help us do that job better at the time I began. And a big issue we have, Tom, is ageism. And that's a sociological issue as well as a counseling issue. And sadly, it's a spiritual issue because ageism, as Dr. Robert Butler coined the term back in 1975, diminishes the value of humans simply because of their age, suggests that they're less capable, less important, and less viable to our society. And that is certainly not what we believe as people of God. 35% of our population right now in most of the countries is over the age of 65. So we need to refire, not retire all this talent.
Well, that's very, very interesting. You're right. There are, especially in Florida where you live, there are a lot of elderly people, a lot of people moving down there because of the weather. What particular problems do you see with the elderly? What are they facing? What particular problems are they facing? And how do they deal with that? How do we deal with that?
The attitude of ageism is one that diminishes human dignity and the ability to flourish simply because of the number of candles on your birthday cake. And it's not just a social problem, it's a church problem. We are not doing any better most of the time within the walls of our churches. We are bringing that same attitude in. And of all the people in the world who not have that attitude, it ought to be us. Pope Francis spoke to that very clearly in one of his encyclicals, talking about the throwaway culture that includes older adults. And I couldn't possibly have said it better. We just see people get to a certain age and you either have mandatory retirement or you're not important anymore, or you go to the euphemistic Silver Saints group or whatever you want to call it, and you go watch, Lawrence Welk reruns. Well, wake up, America. The current young old, of which there are 4 different distinct groups, are basically baby boomers. They're not going there. And they want to be useful. And we're not really using that talent. And oh my goodness, what a wealth of talent for God's kingdom we're about to ignore.
Seems like there's a tremendous body of wisdom there with the elderly that is lost, lifetimes of experience that we can all benefit from that's being lost. How do we tap into that?
Well, first of all, we change our attitude. Attitude is the biggest issue in ageism. It's not just about a number. It's about valuing people. And isn't that what we're all about when we look at the Catholic Christian meta model of the person? We want to call everyone to flourish, not just say, sit down, honey, you're too old. You don't need to flourish anymore. You've made it. No, that's not what we need to be. And we need to show the world how to value older adults because the individualistic cultural orientations like the US have stopped valuing age and wisdom and started valuing youth.
Dr. Arnold, it seems like in this country, it's what can you do? And we start to say, well, the young people are the future and they have so many talents, and a lot of that's true. But then we tend to devalue the experience, the wisdom, and the contributions that everyone can make. To what degree is that, you're going to say, an individualistic culture? Because some other cultures have much more respect than we have here, maybe in the West or in the United States. What is the cultural landscape around the world? Is this a problem that's common in many places, or are there other places we could maybe look to for some good ideas?
It's actually growing. And I always tell my students, pay careful attention to people from individualistic cultures versus collectivistic. Collectivistic cultures have a tendency to place great value on age and wisdom. Individualistic cultures, not so much. And a lot of that is changing around the world. When I addressed the Mexican Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy a number of years ago, I was going to leave out some of the ageism. And the professor who was my host said, no, put it in there because it's even creeping in to us, which had not been there in traditional Spanish-oriented cultures because of the influence of the internet and so much accessibility to other attitudes. The youth culture is beginning to rise even in traditionalistic cultures.
I see in this country that taking care of the elderly is a multi-billion-dollar industry with assisted living, nursing homes, and other types of situations where the elderly are removed from their family and living in these situations, maybe because it's their choice. How do you see the elderly? Are they part of the problem, if I can say that, because they want to be independent, or is their situation kind of forced on them? How do you see that? I don't know if that's an easy question to answer, but are there two sides to this problem?
It's a multiple question. In one sense, as individualistic cultural orientation as we are tend to be in the United States, and we don't necessarily stay in our hometown. We don't live down the street from our parents and grandparents anymore. We don't move into the grandparents' house to help care for the grandparents. We live all over the country. So we are not there. We are not feeling that sense of closeness and responsibility. And there's a number of older adults that I've worked with for whom either their families have passed or they did not have children. We're seeing that as there are fewer children in families now to share that caregiving task. Sometimes it just becomes beyond the family and you need additional help. And those factors are all difficult decisions. Along with growing older, also is the risk of potentially needing additional care help.
I have a two-part question. First part, people are living longer. They seem to be working much longer than they had in the past. So I'm wondering first, how does this get manifested at the workplace? And secondly, you mentioned the church, and probably a lot of people out there we don't intend to do this, but how does that get manifested at a typical church or parish?
Let me address your first part about the workplace. Again, this is the first time in history there have been 5 distinct generations in the workplace. That's causing a lot of change, but I think it's good because it's causing younger adults to interact more with older adults. Now, the church question is dear to my heart. One of my colleagues, Dr. Michael Parker, wrote what I think is one of the most brilliant books on this subject called A Vision for the Aging Church. And he really takes us all to task. He said, we're too quick to focus on, they're retired. Let's don't ask them. Let's don't put them on a committee. Let's don't get people involved. Let's don't give them any sense of responsibility like a chair or working in the school board or whatever your church has available in need. Let's get a younger person because that's just too much for them. No, it's not. That's ageism in itself. And it's just not smart. We've got all this wisdom. I mean, let's be real. Did God call Moses when he was 30? No, he let him get some wisdom first.
Those 5 generations on the workforce, and does that, is it causing divisions? What kinds of problems usually are most typical of that?
It causes challenges, and yet I think it also creates opportunities because, again, with so much mobility and people not living down the street from the grandparents anymore, those 20-somethings of today may be working with people the age of their parents and their grandparents. That has potential for good. You're seeing that there is value and worth and dignity. All the things that we say in the CCMMP doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't have an age limit.
You said something interesting earlier about we're such a mobile culture. I think about my father-in-law who worked for a particular company for 40 years. He was a chemist and successful in what he did, but he stayed with one company in basically one area in upstate New York for 40 years. Who does that anymore? And so he has a lot of networking, network friends, community that is in a certain sense of his extended family, my in-laws' extended family.
Mm-hmm.
When you're moving around, you can't build that network, that community around you. So things are very fragmented now compared to maybe what they were decades ago.
That's an excellent point, Tom. Because of mobility, because of job and career change, we may not have as much of that social structure as was true in times past. And yet I think there's tremendous value in the intergenerational aspects of today's workplace. It's not just you and your friends that are all leaving together. It is you mixing with a lot of different ages. And that is more valuable for the younger workers, I think, than they will realize until they get older.
Have you seen, not shifting here, the COVID pandemic? And obviously, there are more elderly people or older people who are more susceptible to that. How have you seen that? Have you, from your perspective, has this been manifested in a way that pandemic's been handled? And are there, just psychologically, what has that caused more damage?
That is a huge issue. And that separation and that inability to be with family, this touched our family personally. My husband was in rehab during the early part of the COVID pandemic. And thank God, the facility that he went to was one story and we could window visit. Now, and a lot of people did that during the COVID with older adults, with family members who were ill. At least we had some contact. And yes, that lack of contact, that lack of connection is bad. But I can't really just put the finger on COVID. Too often, older adults, whether they live in their home and retire and stay there, or whether they go to an elder care center, they are not given the same level of attention and inclusion with families that they need to be. That is really, it's so sad, but it's also a waste because what they have to give to the grandchildren and the successive generations is invaluable.
I think COVID has highlighted the quote unquote vulnerability of the elderly. They're considered an at-risk population for the pandemic. And so maybe that's kind of exacerbated the idea that they're more fragile, more needy, and kind of eclipsed the positive dimensions of being older, and I don't think we've recovered from that. Now we talk about variance, and I think there's a tendency among the elderly, whether they like it or not, to be more segregated, to keep them for their own safety, and maybe that's not healthy. Maybe that's not something that's been considered as much as it should be. Sometimes
that becomes an excuse. And older adults are just people who've had more candles on their birthday cake than the rest of us have. And I love what Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, who was the president of Pontifical Council on the Family, wrote back about 6 years ago that old age is not a shipwreck, but a vocation. And I applauded when I read that. It is an opportunity to take all that was learned and all that was gleaned and bring it to new places. And I'll just give you a quick example. An older couple that I knew in my church, he was a broadcast engineer, retired. And I had been in broadcasting in my first career, so we would talk about things, and he loved to be able to talk about that. Well, the opportunity came along to go to work with a group called Trans-World Mission, which has trans radio stations. And it was hard for him to get in because at that point he was over 65 and it's like, I don't know. They finally agreed. And what was so wonderful when he came back on a visit, we were chatting, was he went to a very remote area where they had old hand-me-down broadcast equipment, the kind of things that the young engineers had never seen before. And he said, this was like old home week. I know how to work that stuff. I know how to fix it. Give me some baling wire. Give me some tape. This is my world. And he ended up being one of the most valuable people that they had. And they realized that that age and that experience meant more than they could ever have imagined for the kingdom of God. And I just could not get more excited about that. And there's so many ways that can be true.
So, all things work together for good for those who love God, Romans 8:28, right?
Yes.
Everything. And helping people to see that, because sometimes I think there's probably a temptation, as you get older to start, falling into that culture or listening too much to the culture. Well, I'm not as valuable as I used to. I can't do what I used to be able to do. But really seeing it, God has a plan for everything. He's got a plan for each individual, each and every day. And everything works together for good for those who are called, those who love God. What are some ways that people can say, maybe people who feel down about their age, and the direction they're going, that can help them give more meaning to their lives? And you can go, well, I'm going to go travel and play golf, but which is, I'm sure it's fun for some people, but to what degree is it important for them to have, if they're retired, how to give meaning to your life?
We've really got to do some attitude shifting in our world. It's going to start with, and I hope to a certain extent, the multiplicity of generational age groups in the workplace will start to see older adults as not just done and out of here, but people of value. We need to stress this in our church. Don't just send them off to see Lawrence Welk revival or whatever things people think old people want, which, by the way, they're probably more likely to listen to rock and roll because these new old people are baby boomers. They're not going to, their parents listen to Lawrence Welk. Give them a meaningful role. Use the wisdom, use the experience, like with Tom's dad, who has a tremendous professional background. Find a way to use that. Put it together, whether it's in missions, the local church, what we do in our communities. There is plenty of mission work to do in our own communities. It certainly is in mine. Let's show value. And sometimes that comes from authority, Father Charles, from people in ministry, from people in organizations. When they show value to the older adult workers and volunteers, that changes a culture within a group. We need a culture change.
I notice a lot of younger people, there's a sort of, they kind of don't want to be lectured to, but they're looking for mentors. They're looking for people who will spend time with them as an individual, I think. I've seen some people have written about this. So maybe it'd be an opportunity to kind of help guide younger people through. It's a great way to use all the accumulated wisdom, really, that's there. Because just if you look at the technological society we live in, right? Young people are full of so much information these days. But how to use that information, for example, well, and that's where I think wisdom comes in. People who've learned, and anyhow. Could that be something that might be really helpful for people to consider?
Well, you've tapped into one of my secret resources in working with families who have troubled teens. And that is my question. Where's a grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt, an uncle, or even a neighbor who could be the role of a grandparent? Because so often, like middle schoolers, teenagers, they don't want to listen to mom and dad. Mom and dad don't know anything. But you'd be amazed how often they will show respect and attention to the grandparent, the great aunt, the neighbor who's older. It can be that source of wisdom. It's biblical. We're told. Why do we not get the message? The older women are to teach the younger women. The older men are to teach the younger men. We've already been told the formula. We're just not paying attention to the book.
I think it was St. John Paul II who, when he visited a hospital many years ago where there were elderly and infirmed, and he talked about their capacity for offering up their situations to obtain graces for themselves, their families, the world. They have a great opportunity in their situations. Is that something that would help the elderly in this situation to understand the value of what they're going through? Kind of touching on what Father Charles said, that God can bring good out of any situation. Well, some of them are probably ill or infirmed, and or even just the loneliness of their situation can still have tremendous redeeming value. Does that help when you're engaging with people?
Yes, and not being old doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be infirm or necessarily mean you're going to be ill or cognitively impaired. It just means you have a number of years of life. What I have liked to do, in suggesting that about finding a role, finding a refirement, as Dr. Michael Parker calls it, a role that's meaningful, not just let's all go to this cute little program. That's a really funny part about that. I know that I've seen this in a number of organizations, church-based organizations. that had groups for women realized that there are a lot of women and still single mothers as well who are in the workplace. So they have a program for women in the day and they have one in the evening. When are we going to grow up and do that with older adults? Not every older adult can go to the lunch meeting at noon and hang out, but they could go in the evening. We're not meeting the needs of everybody, and we're not asking them to be those mentors. Best mentors we could ever have for the teenagers and the young marrieds in your churches, in all of our churches, would be those people who've lived a long life and love the Lord all that time.
Yeah, you mentioned meeting the needs. And here at Divine Mercy University, here at DMU, we form counselors and other mental health professionals. And what are the needs for? Do we see in this profession as well, in counseling and psychology? What is the need for therapists and counselors who are really dedicated to this? And do you see sort of a similar pattern? Well, people just aren't too worried about the older folks, and they want to focus on the young. So what's the need? And then, what do they need to understand when they get into that to try to do that work?
I had a master's and a doctorate before I got into gerontology, Father, and I didn't know any of this. I had to learn it the hard way, and most of ours do not as well. The shortest chapter in all human growth and development texts, and I've taught in many of them, is old age, death, and dying. You're out of here. Don't care. Very little about ages and nothing about ageism. And here's the thing. We need to look at all people, diagnostically speaking and treatment speaking. If they are adults, they are adults. We don't look at them and say, oh, well, you're retired, so there's not much you can do. Oh, you're 80, so, you won't benefit from counseling. Really? I can introduce you to way too many who have. That is a terrible, terrible ageist attitude. We can't treat our clients that way. We can't treat their needs that way. And being old doesn't just mean you have dementia or some other reason. I know plenty of people in their 80s and early 90s who do not have dementia. They're busy and doing things and serving God and loving serving God. We need to treat people based on their concern and their condition, not on the age that shows up in the birth certificate. That is ageist for us as professionals, and we've got to do better.
I think one thing that elderly couples could do well. My in-laws, they adopted a number of children, and they also worked in the foster care system. They had foster care children, and gave them a home. They gave them obviously their love, their wisdom, and there are a lot more children in need than there are foster parents available. Seems like that would be a great vocation for at least some elderly couples who might be looking for something very meaningful to do. Help mentor, as we're talking about mentor some of these kids who don't have fathers, or at least the fathers aren't present to them, or even mothers. Give them a stable home life, to grow and to flourish.
That can work for some, although there's plenty of opportunities in youth-oriented groups that you can assist with. Even some of the older adults that I know in my church have volunteered at a local public school. They come and they have lunch with some of the children. Now, obviously, they have to be careful what they say in a spiritual perspective because of their environment, but it's the positive influence of older adults. There's opportunities if we look for them, if we have them open. But I think we within the church need to make this aware among our older adults. It's more than just coming and having your lunch meeting or whatever it is you do. Here's how you can serve your community. We all live in a mission field, every one of us. I don't care where you live. You just have to look around and see those opportunities. And people who are retired have more time.
We talk about the Catholic Christian view of the person, and that's throughout the entire life cycle. And of course, the church also very strongly teaches respect for human life from conception until natural death. And the whole problem of euthanasia, how do I guess it seems like there could also be maybe not enough attention given to euthanasia these days.
There is not. There is all the attention, I think, and many of the church concepts are going toward the issue about abortion. But what do you think euthanasia is? It's just abortion after you got born, if you want to put it that way, if that'll make them think about it. Euthanasia is a serious, serious problem. It has been accepted legally in several countries. I believe they're European countries. And, what's to say that we might not have that discussion? Elder care is expensive. People with dementia can live, average is about 12 years after diagnosis, and sometimes longer. So physically, there is not an issue. Euthanasia is a serious problem, and I'm very disturbed that we don't pay attention to it. And again, isn't that ageism? Oh, well, they're old, so, what does it matter? It matters to God. It needs to matter to us. It's about human dignity, and euthanasia is the absolute opposite of human dignity.
I think we have counselors and psychologists and therapists who are out there watching the podcast who may be interested in this or have clients who what are there good resources out there they could look to?
Within the profession, it seems to be a little bit too insular, unfortunately, although when I go to conferences, I tend to bring this subject on in with me, no matter what the conference age group is. The Gerontological Society of America and the local Southern Gerontologist is one of my groups as well. But GSA, Gerontological Society of America, is really the stalwart, if you will, of issues in aging. There's so much good material out there. Dr. Robert Butler's book is excellent. From a Christian perspective, A Vision for the Aging Church. I have 3 volumes on group techniques for aging adults that are used widely in clinical social work programs, but not as much in counseling programs. Go figure. And yet we have the same population group as others. It is not as easy. You have to look on specific locations. But I know when I go to general counselor conferences, I bring this in with me, and hopefully to make awareness greater for more of people in the profession.
Dr. Erwin, this has been very, very interesting. And actually, it's causing me to think. This is something that you don't really hear talked about much.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new topic. So as you're talking, I'm listening. It's not a topic that I've already heard a lot about, and I can quickly come up with questions because I have a lot of experience. I've thought about it. I've read about it. This is something very new. And I think because of that, as you said, a lot of work needs to be done to change our attitudes, to change how we treat the elderly. What are some of the most important things we can do as for you, counselors, members of the church? I mean, what are some concrete steps forward for all of us that will help this situation?
I think for one thing, we have to just absolutely give up those kinds of things like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Actually, you can teach people and dogs at any age. That's ridiculous, but that's intended to be a slight, a diminishing thing. There are a lot of things people say. They make fun of people, blue hairs, oldies, geezers. Those are derogatory terms. If we turned that toward another cultural group and said that, people would be aghast. But no one's aghast. We need a little righteous indignation. When you hear people say that, just say, if I hear that, I go, you think about what you're really saying. Because if God is good, someday you'll be old. You be okay with that? Mm-mm. So we have to check ourselves. We have to check our attitude and look around us and be sure that the people in our neighborhood, the people in our church, of all places, the people in our church, if they're by themselves, go sit with someone, go talk with someone and listen. Yes, older adults have stories. So do we. Our friends tell stories. We just listen and laugh. Older adults tell stories, go, not that again. There's wisdom in those stories.
Maybe there's a little bit of ageism in all of us that we need to recognize. It's something to think about. When you talk about you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I wonder how many times have I said that? So I guess I'm guilty.
But you're not going to say it again, are you, Tom?
No, now I'm not. I'm going to think twice about that. But well, Dr. Erwin, this has been very, very interesting. And again, I thank you so much for being part of this podcast. It's an important topic, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I look forward to having you on again on another topic soon. And in the meantime, I think if anyone has questions about this topic, about this issue, Can they contact you?
Here at Divine Mercy University, it's KERWIN at divinemercy.edu. And I would love to talk with any of our professionals, any of our families, just to give you encouragement. I love something that Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia said, is that old age is not a shipwreck, but a vocation. And let's value it.
Again, Dr. Erwin, thank you so much. Look forward to talking with you in the future. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.